If one person couldn't feel all that, they'd explode.
Just because you've got the emotional range of a teaspoon.
Jesus Christ, first sign of a bad comedian laughing at your own jokes, dear. Anyway, Arthur gets attacked by the snake and... hang on, what's he doing inside the Room of Prophecies? You'd think if you were standing guard to prevent somebody from getting access to the prophecies, you'd stand in front of the door leading into it. What's even more stupid is that should somebody get in a conflict between the guard and the perpetrator, this could potentially result in the prophecy orbs falling down like dominoes as we see later in the film. All they had to do was shoot this sequence in the corridor and I wouldn't have such a big problem with this dream. After Harry has his outburst in Dumbledore's office, we skip a huge section of the book in exchange for his first occlumency lesson. I'm going to hand you over to the critic who will fill you in exactly what happens. He doesn't appear to be around at the moment. He's probably off discussing with the Nerd Council about how great Marvel is as a company. Well, that's what you get for granting him freedom from his mum's basement, isn't it, Harry? Anyway, Arthur is sent to St. Mungo's hospital where Harry and the gang all visit him. The hospital is described as invisible to the public as it is disguised as an empty department store. During Harry's visit, he sees a mindless Gilderoy Lockhart wandering around the ward he shares with Neville's parents, who we see also whilst Neville and his grandmother try to communicate with them. This segment was great in seeing Lockhart again, but really touching and emotional too, considering barely anybody knows about Neville's situation, and he sees his friends whilst visiting his parents, which upsets him quite greatly. This emotion is seen briefly when Neville explains all the information the book had already covered to Harry later, and there is a lot of other fine details from the book that aren't necessary to this review, but were very much interesting to read about nonetheless. Christmas comes, and I really love this short segment in the film for its awkward tension between what Harry did to save Arthur's life. On the one hand, Arthur is praising Harry for being his saviour, but on the other, Ron and Harry know that this was not intentional for Harry to be the one to witness it all. It must be quite confusing for the family in understanding it all and the implications of Harry's relationship with the Order's enemy. This is shown as the silence of the scene screams meaning, as well as Harry's awkward uncertainty spread across his face. I really love the family tree that sprawled across the room in this scene. It's beautifully designed. Radcliffe and Oldman then share a scene to get us even more sympathetic towards Sirius's death later on, and Hagrid returns from his journey. His scene and description of what happened to him is certainly a lot more basic than the book. He and Madame Maxine travel to Lithuania, I think, somewhere in Eastern Europe, and successfully convince the Giants to join the cause upon arrival. Later on, however, the leader of the Giant Pack is usurped by another who wants to join the Death Eaters, and so the pair are forced to flee. Sadly, he also discovers his mother's been dead for years, but has a half-brother Grawp, who he takes with him back to the Forbidden Forest. Seriously, the details aren't that valuable, but it's interesting nonetheless. Unfortunately, this scene ends with yet another one of those horrifically cliche moments where Hagrid looks outside his window and says,
"There's a storm coming, Harry. We'd all best be ready when she does."
Well, that came pretty quick, didn't it? Before I talk about Umbridge blasting her way into the Room of Requirements, I would think it's silly not to mention this missing part of the book that would probably have been displayed by this point in the film. Basically, Harry has this horrific date on Valentine's Day with Cho that shows the decline in their relationship. They sit in a tea shop that Harry finds reminiscent of Umbridge's pink office, as well as lots of other couples making out at other tables, making him feel very uncomfortable. Cho then becomes jealous after Harry says he needs to meet Hermione after the date, and becomes very upset when Harry chooses not to discuss the gory details of Cedric's death. Harry then leaves to meet with Hermione, who blackmails Rita Skeeter into writing articles for the Quibbler about Harry being a good guy, and he gets a load of fan and hate mail as a result. Because Goblet of Fire couldn't be bothered to carry out all of Rita Skeeter's character arc, we obviously couldn't have the latter part of the chapter. However, I think it would have been very interesting to see on the big screen, seeing as Cho raps on the DA to Umbridge later on in the film. I do really like how Umbridge will literally blow her way into the wall of the castle to catch these people who are just practicing magic. It's much more spectacular than what the book depicts, but it would have made more sense if the film had just followed what the book had done. For example, earlier on in the Hog's Head, the members of the DA all sign a binding contract that Hermione creates so that if anybody were to betray them, they would pay the consequences. Cho doesn't rat on the locations of the DA meetings in the book. Her friend Marietta, who has family members in the Ministry, does so instead. Hermione's jinx then comes into play and her face breaks out into several pimples spelling the word sneak. After another excellent example of Umbridge exerting and loving her authority simultaneously in the Great Hall, we come to the introduction of Grawp. In the book he's a lot more violent, but here we see him as this playful, innocent character who just misses his mummy. The animation of this character kind of proves the uncanny valley theory quite well, just like that of most of the characters in Zemeckis' film Beowulf of the same year. It's not that he's meant to look normal, I know that, but it looks strangely mechanical and not very natural like most of the creatures in Harry Potter do. He does remind me of Grendel from Beowulf in a sense, but of course both are completely different characters in respect to their filmic portrayals. It's quite sweet that he tries to bond with the trio so early on, but if he didn't look so awkwardly animated, I might not have been so harsh. I really love this scene in the film of Harry and Snape's final occlumency lesson. In the book he has lots more of these lessons where we learn a lot more of the finer details of Snape's past. For example, we see young Lily Potter standing up for Snape when James bullies him in front of all his friends, but Snape calls her a mudblood and so she gives up trying to help him, though still acts hostile towards James. Not only is this scene beautifully performed by both Radcliffe and Rickman, but also allows us to seriously consider how good of a person James was despite his wonderful reputation we may think of him prior to this scene. Before we tackle that spectacular exam scene, I thought I'd drag in a whole bunch of stuff that the film didn't cover from the book. There's a chapter dedicated to Harry's careers advice with Mcgonagall, which is quite interesting as Umbridge sits in on this as well, where the two teachers argue and bicker throughout it. This happens during McGonagall's inspected lessons too, but those are also omitted from the film. Some of this conflict can be seen in a small section where Minerva and Umbridge argue outside the Great Hall, although it's a very basic version and the scene plays out like a GCSE drama scene attempting to demonstrate use of levels. Umbridge moves up and reclaims her authority, but McGonagall moves up and then she takes it away. As Umbridge wins the argument, she is placed higher in the scene, showing her authority over not only the teachers but the students too. Well, thanks, what's your name? Kai. Kai, okay, thank you for that, mate. Do you still deal around here? Yeah, mate, what you want? Nothing. I was just, wondering. Now get lost. Besides the exam we see in the Great Hall in the film, Harry also has several others of his different subjects in the book, moderated by a bunch of old-timey yet friendly wizards, which irritates Umbridge to no end by basically telling her, "You have no power here." During Harry's astronomy exam, he sees Hagrid being attacked by Umbridge and a bunch of Aurors hired to take him away. McGonagall comes out to fight them, but takes several stunning spells and results in her being taken to St. Mungo's. This segment was apparently set to be a reality in the film, as this photograph of Maggie Smith in a wheelchair proves. It's a real shame this segment wasn't included, as it was a fantastic read showing Umbridge's final desperate attempts to turn the school into a totalitarian nightmare before she gets taken away by the Centaurs. Fred and George's exit from the school in the film is a spectacle to behold. It's a great segment that fuels the rebellious nature hidden with all of them, and it was great watching all of the hard work Filch had put into those educational decrees on the wall just crashing down around her. The regulations and restrictions are now in ruins on the floor, showing that too much of that shit is bad for everyone. Governments, please take note. All 6 of the team who want to help Harry then get stuck in Umbridge's office, and I don't have anything really to say about this other than it was absurdly basic. In fact, I wouldn't doubt that this part probably was more detailed but was cut for length and all that. This section in the book would firstly explain that Luna, Neville and Ginny don't just magically appear like they do in the film, as they were part of Harry's plan to chat with Sirius through the Flu Network but got caught. Secondly, we established that it was Umbridge who sent the Dementors on Harry during the summer. She suggests that nobody in the Ministry had the guts to actually do anything about ruining Harry's reputation or silencing him, so she thought it best to get there first. This is probably why she jumps the gun during the hearing with this line.
So silly of me, but it sounded for a moment as though you were suggesting that the Ministry had ordered the attack on this boy.
As if she wasn't a big enough see you next Tuesday, this really is the cherry on the cake in displaying her tyrannous attitudes. Why wasn't this detail mentioned in the fucking movie? The colour tone of the forest is a complete contrast to that of Umbridge's bright pink dress, really showing how out of place she is for her natural habitat of nature. Again, the CGI isn't that fantastic here for the Centaurs. I know that there are lots of them in this scene, but come on, Firenze looked fucking awesome in the first movie. What happened? Oh yeah, the last scene had to look pretty great, so sacrifices had to be made, I guess. The film kind of slowly edges in Ron and Hermione's inevitable relationship with these polite comments that I honestly can't remember occurring in the book. I presume they did this to make their relationship bloom earlier, so moments of unrest between the two in Half-Blood Prince are made more emotional. I don't really have much of a problem with this in concept, but the two just seem to compliment and congratulate each other a little too often and in the most bizarre circumstances for me. I love how there's no mention of how on earth Hermione, Ron or Ginny were able to fly on their thestrals without great difficulty, considering none of them had seen death before this point. They don't seem confused or terrified by the fact they cannot see exactly what they're flying on. Oh, don't worry, we're at the Ministry now, everyone, calm down! I do feel quite disappointed with how little this final segment of the film covered compared to the book. In fact, the whole Department of Mysteries is pretty much reduced to a corridor, the prophecy room, and the room with the archway in it. The book depicts a whole bunch of rooms and corridors that seriously baffled me as to where on earth the characters were, which is pretty great as it added to the mysterious situation our characters found themselves in. The entrance contains 12 doors that once leaving any of them rotate several times so those that enter don't know which door to go through afterwards. This includes a brain room, a room containing a tank filled with brains and tendrils that attack Ron, a time room where all of the time turners are destroyed, and of course the Hall of Prophecy and the Death Chamber containing the Veil. In the film we skip pretty much all of this so that we reach the prophecy room pronto, because that's what's important, isn't it, guys? Fuck the world building, fuck any form of mystery within the Department of Mysteries, just so long as it's not too long for the fucking idiot audience's brain to stop paying attention and begin demanding their money back. Right, so let's talk about that bloody prophecy. Firstly, I'd like to note that Film Theory does a damn good job of analysing this whole thing, so I don't have to, so go and check out that video over there if you haven't already. I highly recommend watching it. The link will be in the description. I'm not 100% convinced by the argument because there must have been a specific reason Voldemort would go for Harry instead of Neville. For example, if Neville's parents were these great auras who went on the front lines of the Order's defence, surely they would be the right choice in crippling your enemy, right? Oh yeah, that's right, Voldemort chose Harry for the reason that he fits the criteria better than Neville. Yeah, I'm going there. Neville was not born as the month of July died, a day before it in fact. And the 3 encounters thing, we will never know how many times either parents fought off the Dark Lord, but I can almost guarantee that auras would have encountered the enemy more than 3 times. If we're implying that Neville is the chosen one, we are not only shitting on all of Harry's efforts to defeat Voldemort almost every year he attends Hogwarts, but it just doesn't make sense why Harry would have this mental connection with the Dark Lord. The other part is that considering this prophecy is about Harry, it establishes jack shit. We know he will be the one to slap the old codger into the ground from day one, and Voldemort knows this. The whole story is named after him, for fuck's sake. I think from here on in, the action pretty much takes up the majority of my praises for the rest of the video. This action sequence that goes on right up until the end of Dumbledore's duel is just phenomenal. I do think the snag of the first running and wand-waving segment is that the prophecy room is just too damn dark. There apparently is enough light to see all the prophecies lined up for miles and miles, but the floor is completely black. I may be completely wrong here, but it looks like a blue screen job for the entire scene, making it look not only extremely cheap, but also very aesthetically dull. It does, however, brighten up when Ginny goes and fucks up all the shelves, contrasting well, but I still would have liked the room to have been a set instead of a quick trip to the blue screen room to make the location look a bit more real. When you force this kind of darkness, it removes what made the scene dark in the first place with accordance to the story. I do really like this strange form of apparating that the Death Eaters and Order members have throughout these sequences. I'm really uncertain as to whether or not this kind of thing makes any form of appearance in the books, but it certainly livens up the action that takes place in these sequences. This becomes more ghostly than anything when we see that Death Eater and Voldemort coming very close to Harry like that. Fortunately, the Room of Death, as I like to call it, is a set and looks absolutely remarkable. The dueling looks very well choreographed, so much so that those dueling do actually look like they're performing a type of dance. And Sirius's death pulled my heartstrings, man. I'm glad neither book nor film dragged out his death to make it look more emotional than it needed to be. The afterthought of losing him and the idea of Harry potentially living with him being completely crushed in a moment of literary genius that would drive Harry to defeat Voldemort and his cronies for the rest of the series, regardless of his grief or lack of a home with somebody he cares about. As much as this emotional connection makes me hate the character Bellatrix Lestrange, I feel that Helena Bonham Carter brings an absolutely fantastic portrayal of the character in the films. I say this not only because it was a fantastic casting decision that ensured the character would be portrayed correctly, but she stands out so much amongst the other Death Eaters because of all the others being so fucking boring. Ugh, Jesus Christ, I wish that some of the other members of Voldemort's group of heartless bastards would carry a bit more weight than being extremely sullen or boring, which makes Lestrange seem so much more menacing as she taunts Harry repeatedly and of course kills his only family member remaining. Before I explain how amazing this duel between Voldemort and Dumbledore is in the film, let me just say that the book version is very good, but I have to give the points to the film for making it such an amazing experience that was building up from when Harry and his friends start dueling with the Death Eaters. Basically, in the book, Dumbledore brings the statues in the atrium to life to help fight Voldemort and protect Harry from harm. Fawkes even comes along and takes a hit from the killing curse, but is subsequently reborn from the ashes of its corpse. It's certainly a lot more detailed, and it's very apparent that Dumbledore uses elements of the world to his advantage instead of just simply casting spells, which is very interesting. The duel in the film is quite possibly one of my favourite moments in the film series, as this fight is literally so intense and aesthetically pleasing for a fantasy series that I am always in awe of the special effects that take place. This is the first time in the series we see Dumbledore showing off his full power as a wizard in the combative sense, and he's a fucking badass. This is also the only time in the series where the leaders of the good and the bad face off to each other, and the climax of this segment brews up as the two are locked in that fantastic duel that's displayed on screen. I'm unsure if it's just the colour tone of the scene, but it's strange that Voldemort's side of the fight is a blue instead of a green like we saw in the previous film. As soon as that ends though, holy fucking shit. What on God's earth are all these incredible spells they cast at each other? I mean, I'm not one of these super nerds that's interested in finding out precisely what methods of spell casting is required to create these magnificent displays of snake fire and water orbs, but in all honesty, it's unlikely that Harry will find out how to perform spells like this in his school life, considering these two masters of wizardry have had decades to learn how to conjure this stuff. I think the one thing that makes this scene work so fucking well is the lack of music within it. Not a single note of score is heard during this duel, and I don't blame the director for choosing not to place any here. Sometimes scenes in films are just best left silent to create an intense atmosphere that music simply cannot describe. I think the smashing of the glass not only bursts the climax that was building in this scene fantastically, but also consider the implications of the glass bursting in a metaphorical sense. The later stories not only show the downfall of the Ministry, but also the slow and inevitable infiltration of the Ministry by the Dark Forces. Voldemort's corrupting influence on the Ministry is seen in this film, but this one moment says to me that he will now be infiltrating the system directly, taking the power of good from the magical world by force. Harry's little fit of rage is quite good, even if it seems a bit unnecessary and overkill considering how much amazing stuff happened right before this, but it works to show how young this poor boy is, and how out of control he becomes because of this influence from the Dark Lord. Sounds of Molly Weasley's warnings earlier in the film can be heard in this final segment. Dumbledore's chat with Harry before the end of the film is abysmally limited in some of the information that should have been delivered in this segment, but most of it I've already explained throughout the course of the review. One thing I didn't mention, however, is that it is Professor Trelawney who created the prophecy, which ties up nicely why Dumbledore has kept a hold of her at Hogwarts, seeing as she does possess the true power of seeing, even if it does happen very infrequently. Despite we never know this in the film, it is Emma Thompson's voice who recites the prophecy when Harry hears it in the film. In fact, I would say the final scenes of the film are extremely underwhelming. Harry has a chat with Luna about her lost stuff and then says that he has something worth fighting for, whereas Voldemort doesn't, and then the credits roll. Wait, what? Are you fucking serious? Where the fuck is that lovely section where Harry finds a two-way mirror in the bottom of his bag that would have allowed him to contact Sirius before his death? Where's his chat with Nearly Headless Nick, who states that not all wizards come back as ghosts, and only those that fear death have the potential to become ghosts? Oh, they were cut, were they? The worst part about this whole idea of there being a 3-hour cut of Order of the Phoenix is that I literally don't know who to blame for all this. God fucking damn it. I sound like Brian. Speaking of which, where is that little weasel? So, did it suck? After careful consideration, I don't think Order of the Phoenix is my favourite Harry Potter film anymore. It is still, in my opinion, one of the better Harry Potter films, even if my experience with the book was rather disappointing. The book itself is definitely a good one, but unfortunately it is far too long, and undoubtedly there is a lot to cover, but the best segments of the book are when events are actually occurring, and pointless prophecies aren't made the main focus. The film's decision to make Umbridge the main focus of the story was a good one, even if it means some of the more intricate details do get left behind. Goblet of Fire's simple plot bears a lot of blame on this, unfortunately, but this isn't really much of an excuse considering the big what if that looms over us. The idea of a 3-hour cut of the film, which we will sadly probably never see. Some of the other positive elements of the film include the fantastic music, overall designs of the newer locations, some brilliant editing, and the final battle between the two most powerful wizards of the story is some essential Hollywood viewing. Unfortunately, it creates a lot of plot holes due to not following closely enough to the source material. The cliches and somewhat downgraded CGI we see at times spoils the film. The book has some incredible moments that made me happy that I read the book, but it's only in the last 100 or so pages that I feel the story really picks up, and it's a shame there is so much unnecessary waffle and clutter we have to read through in order to get there. I give the Order of the Phoenix film and book a 7 out of 10 and 6 out of 10, respectively. Thanks for watching, and here is some more improvised lines. I have a board of cheese that sits inside my pocket. It melted one day, and so I had to take off my trousers and wash them. What's even more stupid is that should somebody get in a conflict between the guard and the perpetrator, could protect Orlando Bloom, where the two teachers argue and bitter throughout it. I said bitter. I could do with a fucking bitter to get me through this damn thing.
But I don't like beer.
In the book, Fred and George don't exit school as I do feel. Sometimes scenes in films are just Beth. Nice to meet you, Beth.